Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sneak peek. We're so excited to welcome you and welcome our creative team for this year's production of Turandot. So I want to just welcome everyone here from the opera supporter team, Opera Focus, and say thank you so much for supporting this wonderful performance. And I would love to kick it off to our stage director, Eric Einhorn. At the very end, we will have time for Q&A, and I'll also do some wrap up with some wonderful opportunities for you to join us and engage more with the opera, including a rehearsal and a dinner on opening night. So, Eric, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for getting on Zoom at a relatively early time to learn more about our production. And sort of as Daniel said, it's Turandot, it's Turandot. It's that is sort of the first question that people always have when we do this opera is, do you pronounce the final T or not? That is something that I unfortunately won't be answering today because I don't yet know. It sort of goes 50-50 depending on your cast and your conductor. So Carl and I will conference in a few weeks and figure out what we're doing, but both are acceptable. I'm Eric Einhorn. I'm the stage director for this production. I am thrilled to be coming back to Orange County. This will be my fifth time working with the Pacific Symphony. I am so thrilled. Before this, I did Turandot 10 years ago with the symphony. I did Tosca many years before that, Madame Butterfly in between, and Carmina Burana that we did somewhere along the way. So I've I've always loved working with the symphony. It's one of my favorite places to work. I'm thrilled to be back. I want to introduce some members of our team. Um, Kate, why don't you start us off?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Kate Cisek. I'm the costume designer on this production, and I'm very excited to be sharing a sneak preview, and I hope you enjoy what you see today.
Great. Robin. Did we lose you, Robin?
Unmute. I got muted. Hey, I'm Robin Walsh. I am a puppet artist, and I'm very excited to share a little sneak preview of something you don't always see in opera. I do. Some puppetry that we've worked into it.
Excellent. And our lighting designer, Ken Smith, unfortunately couldn't be here today. He, like many designers, is busy and on a plane right now. But we have a little pre-recorded message from him to give you an overview of his approach. So welcome to our behind the scenes look at Turandot. I want to begin by the most important piece of this is to wish this opera a happy 100th birthday. We are performing this opera almost to the day of the world premiere 100 years ago. It premiered at La Scala in Milan on April 25th, 1926. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to do this at such a great landmark for this opera. It, as I'll go into in a little bit, the opera was actually written, was completed as far as Puccini got 2 years before this in 1924. Unfortunately, he died before the opera was completed. His music ends in the middle of Act 3 with the death of the character Liu. And the publisher Ricordi and the iconic conductor Arturo Toscanini, who was a frequent collaborator with Puccini's, they were sort of tasked with figuring out how to finish the opera. Puccini had sketched a couple dozen pages of the end of the opera. Some of the libretto was incomplete. There were some sketches for some of the music, but not enough to simply just finish it based on what Puccini had left. So after a few different proposals for who should finish this, one of whom was Mascagni, the very famous composer of Cavalleria Rusticana, and very successful Verismo opera composer of the same period. They were all auditioned and tossed aside eventually for a man named Franco Alfano, who was a student of Puccini's, who got the job basically because he wrote something very similar around the same time. He wrote a story. He wrote an opera heavily influenced by sort of East Asian themes and very heavy orchestrations. And the publisher and Toscanini, the conductor, saw the value, I suppose, in someone with a skill set that could more or less get out of the way. Because who could compete with Puccini? And Alfano was deemed as sort of an acceptable proxy. And that is the ending that premiered 2 years later after his death in 1926. And it's the ending that, for the most part, opera companies around the world do to this day. In recent decades, people have gone so far as to commission new endings. The Washington National Opera did one a few years ago that was recorded by a Chinese-American composer. There have been various attempts, and each one brings its own special quality to it, but nothing. We are missing inherently what Puccini would have written himself. But the Alfano ending is what we'll hear next month. It's what we did 10 years ago. It's what, again, you'll hear most everywhere. But what is this opera about? So on its surface, the opera is a fairy tale set in what the score says is mythic China. It takes place in the kingdom of Emperor Altum, who is, for all intents and purposes, a benevolent emperor who has a daughter named Turandot, who is less benevolent. There is a history in the kingdom of war, of a history of neighboring kingdoms trying to overtake the emperor's kingdom. In the opera, we learn about a warrior princess who ruled this kingdom and was overtaken by a neighboring kingdom, and sort of this string of male rulers who violently took this kingdom. And as a result, in our present day, Turandot is this warrior princess in very much in the pattern of her forebears, who is protecting this kingdom literally with her life. The bargain that she sets up is that if you can answer these three riddles I set before you, if you can answer them correctly, then I will give myself to you in marriage, and you can become the ruler of this kingdom. Unfortunately, for everyone who tries to answer these riddles, they're near impossible, and there is a string of unsuccessful suitors who get beheaded. That's the deal. If you can answer them, you can marry Turandot. If you don't answer them successfully, you get your head cut off. So we begin this opera as the Prince of Persia is coming to attempt to answer these riddles. Unfortunately, he is not successful, and he is done away with. At the same time, we meet Kalaf, who is a prince, a Tartar prince from not so far away. He's on the run because his own kingdom is being sort of taken over by somebody else. So he's on the run. And then his father is also on the run. His father, Timur, who is the king of the Tartar Empire, is on the run with a servant girl in tow named Liu. And they both end up fortuitously in the same place, in the court of Turandot. They're all in hiding because they don't want anybody to know where they are, because the Tartar kingdom is under attack and they are being hunted. The Tartar kingdom, for all I can glean, is somewhere in the far Eastern European and into Mongolia. It's sort of this nebulous area. But they are, suffice it to say, they have come a long way, and they are now here. Kalaf falls desperately in love with Turandot upon seeing her, because this is a fairy tale after all. And he then enters the contest to answer these riddles. The people that attempt to stop him are not only his father and Liu, but the ministers of the kingdom named Ping, Pang, and Pong, who try to stop him and convince him to make better use of his life. He says, no, I must do this. He ends up facing these riddles, answering them successfully, to which Turandot loses her mind because she can't possibly go through with this, because nobody ever would answer these questions successfully. So as a counter, Calaf says, okay, fine. I answered these. Now you have to answer one riddle for me. And if you answer successfully, I give my life over to you. If you don't answer successfully, then you have to marry me still. And the riddle is, tell me what my name is. Because up until now, Calaf has not named himself. He has not come out with his name. He is a foreigner here. So Turandot is left with no recourse. As a result, she keeps the entire kingdom up all night trying to figure out what this guy's name is. And because of that, it gives us opera's greatest aria ever written, Nessun Dorma, which translates to nobody is sleeping. Sort of loses something a little epic when you translate that. It's actually an aria about insomnia in a lot of ways. Nobody figures it out, and it takes the death of Liu, who sacrifices herself, who up until her death, she doesn't give his name up to Turandot. She kills herself, sacrifices herself for love, and in the end, Turandot and Calaf go head to head. Basically, Calaf is unrelenting in his desire to marry her. Finally, she relents. And in doing so, in discovering this love between them, he gives over his name to her. And then the final scene, she goes back to court to announce what his name is. And rather than saying that his name is Calaf, says, Father, Emperor, I've discovered what his name is. His name is love. The kingdom is happy, and we live happily ever after in fairy tale land. The problem with Turandot is a problem that you find in a lot of opera, and that's the issue of Orientalism. Now, Orientalism was a trend in the arts and in opera, specifically from the 18th through the 20th century. It based itself on taking characters, themes, locations from North Africa, the Far East, the Middle East, and exoticizing them, fetishizing them quite a bit. And it was all the rage. You see this in sort of 19th century chinoiserie, in fashion, in architecture, in furniture, this sort of this fantasy version of what Westerners believed the East was about. This is a problem in opera from its earliest stages. You have Abduction from the Seraglio by Mozart in 1782, which focused in Turkey. You see these costumes are sort of emblematic of an idea of what culture was like. You have the Pearl Fishers by Bizet in 1863, which was meant to take place in Ceylon. You have Aida by Verdi in 1871, of course, ancient Egypt as we know it in opera. You have Carmen in 1875, which, while set in Spain, not exactly an Orientalist location, Carmen herself is from the Roma, from the Gypsy population, which is a exoticized population by Westerners. You have Lakme by Dilib, which took place in India. You have the Mikado, which is Japanese inspired. Likewise, Madame Butterfly in 1904. You have Puccini's version of Japan, which was based on a play by the very famous American playwright David Belasco, neither of whom had ever been to Japan. And then you get to Turandot in 1924 and 26. Turandot was based on a play by Carlo Gozzi, you see here, an Italian playwright, sort of in the commedia dell'arte fashion, which had no basis in fact to anything Chinese in its knowledge and its understanding. The one thing I will give to Puccini is that he tried as best he could for some version of um, authenticity in the approach to music, to folding in authentic Chinese music to the opera. And there actually is this collection of music boxes that a German watchmaker went to China in the early 20th century and collected these traditional folk tunes that he then made into music boxes. And the lore goes that on several of these music boxes were these tunes, traditional tunes, that Puccini used for bits and pieces of Turandot. So there is an attempt at authenticity. Puccini even commissioned a set of 13 gongs specifically for composing Turandot. So there was, again, there was an attempt to do the right thing. Late 19th century, early 20th century practice just took him to a certain point. Nowadays, if you were trying to write a piece like this, you would spend weeks and months and years studying Chinese music and these characters, and there's a different approach nowadays. Whereas 100 years ago or so, it was all about using it as a hook for audiences. This was the exciting thing to do, and so Turandot is the sort of the tail end of this trend in opera, but not without its challenges. And so, as I'll talk about in just a second, the approach to directing and producing an opera like this or Madame Butterfly, you really have to start with the question of what's it going to look like? What is the way in? What kind of story are we telling? And there are plenty of productions out there that have, I think, navigated the sort of Chinese aesthetic, or in Butterfly's case, the Japanese aesthetic, fairly successfully. But it is one of those questions that is prevalent in opera now, which is what's the value, frankly, of doing operas like this that are on the page quite problematic from a cultural point of view. And I would argue that there is significant value if you can wrestle successfully with this question of what does it look? What's the mechanism of the story? But first, not only do we have the question of how do we do this, which is a tricky question, it's how do we produce an opera at all in a concert hall? Segerstrom Hall is an incredible venue, as I'm sure all of you already know, and hopefully because you're here to learn about opera, you've seen many of the operas that the Pacific Symphony has produced in years past. So you know that it is in fact a hospitable environment for opera. But as a creative team, there are challenges because opera traditionally is meant to happen in a proscenium theater, with an archway and a void into which you place this world. The orchestra is hidden away in an orchestra pit. The audience watches in exactly what we want them to see. But in a beautiful hall like this, there are challenges. But for me, having now had the pleasure of working in this space many times, I just love leaning into every element that this hall offers that you can't get in a traditional theater. Among those things are the sheer magnitude of the space, the scale of the hall, the beauty of the hall, the fact that it in and of itself is a work of art. and you can see it in these in the image on the right behind these hinged panels in the hall. You have these reverb chambers that I know are part of the acoustical plan of the hall, but that uh, we have used quite successfully by placing different groups of chorus in reverb chambers to give this kind of uh, distant effect, and again filling the hall differently as only you could like this. Um, One thing I have done once, which was great, but for many technical reasons, we can't revisit, and that's there's a lift downstage center where the podium is here that is meant for a grand piano from the basement that we used during Tosca. That was wonderful. So it's for me really about not shying away from what this space is, but using it as part of the visual design of the production. It is so beautiful. Why not lean into it? And so the approach for this year, so this was our approach in 2016, as you can see, squarely in the sort of Chinese mythology inspired visual language. And that was a very intentional choice at the time. We had what you can see on the left-hand side was a 100-foot wide video screen onto which we projected this incredible video that told the story through a storybook. That at the very beginning of the opera, we saw this storybook on the video screen open, and it took us into this world. So we set it up as a story. This was not us trying to show an accurate presentation of anything. This was a fairy tale. This year, however, we wanted to take a slightly different approach. That having done video so many times in this space, I was itching for something more physical. And so working with Kate and Robin and Ken, the assignment, the sort of the brief was, how can we fill this space with actual things that bring the story to life in a different way? We're still using this framing technique of a storybook. We will see at the beginning of the opera, there's a table with a large storybook on it. A child enters, opens the book as the opera begins, and out of the book literally comes the character of the Mandarin who announces the beginning of the opera. So immediately we are sprung forth from a book. You might recognize the top left image from the movie Neverending Story, from which I get a lot of inspiration with this production, because it's all about a child reading this story, projecting himself into the role of the hero, and sort of learning a lot about himself as she goes. Part of that you can see in the other image here is this book, The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, which is a treatise on the power of fairy tales, not only for children, but for human beings in general. An interesting side note is that Stephen Sondheim actually used The Uses of Enchantment as kind of the basis for Into the Woods. That is why that's why Act 2 of Into the Woods is the way it is, because of The Uses of Enchantment. So just sort of keep that nugget there. But what does this all mean? We steer away from any sort of truly Asian-inspired imagery or visual language for this overly physicalized language, and for that, we'll start looking at the individual pieces of this, starting with costumes. And Kate.
Hi. In true opera fashion, I am also coming to you today like from outside a rehearsal hall. So if you hear singing in the background, it's on brand, but I apologize for any background noise you might catch. So as Eric was saying, we talked a lot about this idea of the fairy tale and how in fairy tales there is sort of these iconic representative like human experiences that we and we learn from, right? They're lessons, they're indicative of human experience. We have morals we take from them sometimes. And so in getting to know the opera, and particularly our central character of Turandot, the thing that I was sort of most impressed by in the narrative was this trauma, this legacy of trauma from the wars and the conquering and the taking over and the violence, and how that had compounded in her as a character and set her up for this very particular worldview and this very particular approach to like how she treated others. And in sort of my experience of her prior to working on the opera and studying her, she's like in sort of casual culture, she's sort of just presented as like this really mean woman who just does mean things. But then you get into it and it's sort of like, oh no, she's like deeply traumatized. And then there's actually reason and motivation behind this that I had not experienced is how she's understood and talked about. So I wanted to sort of address that and think about like what is it to come forward in this moment of her experience and how she would be presenting herself. And so Eric and I talked a lot about her as sort of embattled and this person who is like responding to a violent world. So can we click to the first set of costumes? So I looked at her often as this literally an armored person, right? She's in this position of authority and she gets to make these decisions. And so I imagined her sort of getting dressed for the battle of life, of her life. But that this process and the legacy she's responding to is, it's not a new thing, it's ongoing, and that the stress and the physical demands and the reality of living this way had like to some degree taken a toll on this physical persona. So like whereas we think about the sort of iconic knight in shining armor of fairy tales, this is sort of like the upside down version of that. So it's dirty and it's worn and it's distressed and it's been through the mud and it's seen murders and death and destruction all around her. And so I wanted to combine the elements of armor with sort of like what would be the wearable elements of what she's been through. So you can see on her cape, like there are other little heads and like there is almost this like quantifiable distress of like what she's been through before, so that as the audience, it's sort of like, oh no, like what have I walked into and what is it's and so we're not just singing about what we're doing. We're sort of wearing it and it like it physically weighs on us. And then going into Act 3, when she's keeping the whole kingdom up, I sort of imagined this cloak of almost like, her disguise so she can move through the streets and find the answer and find out the name and but also be this sort of like imposing figure, this like shrouded destructive like threat. And then finally, when we get to the finale, there's this sort of rebirth. And so I'd looked at a combination of like, I wanted to sort of embrace these visual elements of femininity, which she doesn't have access to in other parts of the opera. But I also looked at like Venus on the half shell and sort of these like images of woman reborn and how that would work for our singer. So this like the garment in Act 3 has like elements of iridescence sort of hidden in it so that there can be moments. And this is something I'm excited to work with Ken, our lighting designer, about, where it's like, well, like what happens when the light hits it that way? And like almost sort of giving her the ability to like glow and be reborn and shine in a way the circumstances of her life have not enabled her to before. So that's her. And then if we can jump to the next slide. Koloff, very much sort of our like medieval hero. He's uh it's sort of like this like the fairy tale version of like man of action. But he's also sort of in disguise. So he's not our knight in shining armor. He's sort of our knight in durable textile action. And so like looking at things like linens, canvases, like things where like I can imagine this character standing up and doing the right thing, because that's what he does. He puts himself in the way of the problem in this opera and says like, I will face it head on. And you can't do that if you're not in something durable. Eric and I also looked at a color story where like we revisit the color blue whenever we're kind of confronted with love and truth and like sort of genuine connection between people. So Koloff sort of represents that. He kind of comes in with that idea from the beginning. Um, and we talked too about the relationship between Koloff and Liu and how it like I joked a lot, like I think they would have actually made a great couple, but the circumstances don't allow for it. But they're both moving through this world with love and with honesty and with a sense of like truth and justice and like a sense of right. And so that's sort of worn on them. I with Liu, I also wanted to play with sort of the question of status. So even though Koloff is on the run, he is still a prince, right? So the color is brighter, the lines are cleaner. We sort of get this sense of like the hero, and not like, you know, capital T, capital H in line with our idea of the fairy tale. Whereas with Liu, like as a servant or essentially you know, enslaved person, the there's more wear, there's more tear. Her over bodice is this like sort of structured leather almost cage that she's like within because that's her status. And then finally, Timur, who is Khalif's dad. This, like to some degree, I almost feel like we should, like, you know, get ready to segue to puppets because this interacts very much with the puppet. And so, you know, it was a challenge for me as a costume designer to think about, like, well, what is the body that is within the body and how those garments interact and support the narrative around this character actually being a puppet, but there's a person operating it as well. So I looked a lot at, with Eric's guidance, I looked a lot at, you know, very tactile textures and materials, things that felt like rough and homespun and gritty and like as if this, you know, because this character is on the run essentially. So it's like he's climbed over mountains and rocks and things have gotten torn and worn and they've been, you know, sweated in and so like helping the audience feel that effort and that labor that's gone into bringing the character to us in this moment. Um, the next page, please. Then we have Ping Pang and Pong. And you know, these were a challenge, an exciting challenge because they have the comedy in this very deeply troubling world. They're also sort of our bureaucrats, and so working with Eric and with Robin to build their puppet personas, but also sort of embrace their bureaucratic silliness. And so I like this the suit, the kind of contemporary suit, as this like this box that we've had in Western culture for like the politician, right? So it's like from our contemporary suit today, like reaching all the way back into sort of like the morning coats of days before, and how that structure is something we associate with particularly like the male bureaucrat, and finding a way to like bring it into this like bright and colorful world of the fairy tale. So these are like a combination of like velvet and minky, and they're these like very sort of like fun puppet cartoon textures and textiles that will bring sort of they definitely lift and bring levity to a like an otherwise like textured and destructive world. Um, totally different, the executioner. And I was really interested in this idea of like Turandot compels this violence, but doesn't actually do it herself. And so we have to bring on an executioner. And this idea, particularly that the violence in this opera is being delivered to us initially by women. And so what is it to have this sort of female figure on stage as the executioner? But then I also wanted, because of the size of the Siegerstrom and like this idea that there's going to be someone sitting very far away, of like how can the costume itself almost become a representation of the role, right? And so this very long hat and this piece of silk and this idea that almost like she is the scythe herself, and that even from the very back of the house there is a degree of danger and violence to the character. And then if you look at the Mandarin and the puppeteers together, essentially, oh, I'm glad you like that. Um, they are sort of the book, right? They are the literal fairy tales. So the Mandarin is all the pages, and the puppeteers are single pages. And so I was able to unite them texturally with other characters and through the use of like cottons, canvases, and linens. But I am right now in the midst of actually like sort of gel printing onto linens and silk different like pages from books. And so they will appear like almost like the book metamorphosized into a human being on stage. And I feel like I see my light. So I'm gonna let puppets take over from here. But I'm very excited to share these costumes.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, a perfect segue into Puppet Land and this idea of seeing the world through the eyes of this child who's reading this book. And for this, I turn it over to Robin.
All right, here we go. Thank you. Yeah, I first love working with symphonies and orchestras and operas and ballets. It's not something you see a lot, so I thought I'd quickly just kind of lay some groundwork for how I got there and what my impetus is to create these kind of pieces. I trained in Germany under a famous marionettist called Albrecht Rosa. And of course, there we studied a lot with classical music. And then my first one was 20 years ago with Stanford University. I did Firebird. And while many people consider puppets to be for children, or often they consider them quite small, um, truthfully, a puppet can be whatever you want it to be. And classical music is often grand, and it's a perfect opportunity to go grand or go home. So I tend to create large scale, like 12, 14 feet or bigger puppets that can often be made out of silks so that they can both be very small and then explode into these beautiful, large images on stage. And I find opera the perfect point, as well as a lot of the ballets. And I too, this is my fourth or fifth time working with the Pacific Symphony, which I'm very excited. Again, I also love that hall because it gives a lot of playing space for large puppets, even with an orchestra on the stage. And the other thing I find that works especially well with Turandot is that the way I approach designing puppets and doing puppetry is puppets aren't actually the thing or the character that you see. They are the idea of that item or that character. They're not literal because, like, even with the best actor or singer, at the end of the day, they go home, they pop open a beer, they relax. But that puppet, like the Prince of Persia puppet, is always going to be the Prince of Persia. There's this like iconic ideal to them that lends itself so well to the world of opera. And so now to this piece, there's three kinds of puppetry basically that will be seen. One is leaning into the storybook world. One of my favorite kinds of puppetry that really I find excites the imagination and is often seen in a darkened space is shadow puppetry. So when we started talking about this storybook, I came up with the idea of why don't we do shadows? And so we've turned, once the storybook opens, you realize for the backdrop in above the symphony is a pop-up shadow book. So it will create the settings and then occasionally enact parts of the fairy tale that you'll see. And we'll also have two screens on either side of the stage if we need any accent or extra shadows or light play. And here we have a very rudimentary test of our first draft of the Shadow pop-up book. Eric, would you please? And so here you can see it's a pop-up book. And again, for the medieval kind of fairy tale, we're going in the woodcut kind of style. So I have somebody we're making, like, for every scene, you'll get to see And we're still debating, do you see the hand, or is it like a magical book opening? And so we really like how that kind of brings the whole audience into kind of experiencing the pop-up book, the fairy tale book, as the story progresses, turning. And then another style of puppetry that we have is the characters. So we have several of the puppets actually being performed by the opera singers themselves, which presents its own unique style of considerations and issues that often with puppetry you find yourself, because the puppet is the thing that really matters. It's the character, it's the icon that people are watching. But an opera singer needs to be in a very good position to sing. So it's how do you design a puppet to do both? And sometimes it's the puppet is near or around the singer. And that is the case with both Liu and Turandot, whom I viewed based on what Kate so beautifully said. To me, they're like the two sides of a coin, where Turandot has this grand ideal, but her ideal has been trapped in vengeance and revenge and what it's done to her, where, and at the same time, she has privilege, yet she chooses this path. Whereas Liu, who is part of the underprivileged, chooses the path of the opposite, love. And so I see them as kind of the how one Liu's story, and when Liu's sacrifice kind of influences or in shows Turandot the path to love. It opens her sacrifice of Liu opens up Turandot's mind to what love can be. And what I love is working with Kate's costumes designs, because with Liu, when she dies, her costume comes up and becomes this kind of ethereal ghost. And again, we're playing with the interplay of light in her costume kind of shining out. And then when Turandot is now open to love, you can see her glowing from within. So there's this give and take between these two characters in my world. So based on that, they are these big silks that kind of come off. And Turandot, when she comes up in this armor, she's going to have these silks that are at first very angular and pointy, but then when they lift up from her, you can see that they are these silks based on her costume colors. So they're blacks and grays and then a little tinge of green at the beginning. And then they fly off and kind of do her bidding so they can encompass the stage. They can wrap around a character. So she's like puppeteering from a distance, like she's controlling the executioner to do her will. She's telling the whole city to stay up to do her will. So we're kind of embodying that in these large silks that are at one point pointy and sharp, but at another point beautiful and flowy. So I'll be working with that dichotomy for that character. And now to the next slide. And here we also have the Ping, Pang, and Pong, which, they're the bureaucrats. And traditionally they have these Chinese masks. So what we're doing is they have hats with a kind of a face. And they have the like top hat and cane. So they can put the top hat on a cane where it can become a puppet. And it can do the things they don't want to do. So then they have the ability to put the hat on or take it off and sing from themselves. So they have this duality of character while we're interacting with these kind of muppety pseudo faces and big feathers. And again, like the velvets and the fur that provide a sense of whimsy to these characters who perform torture. So it's funny torture. But what it allows is the sense of separation from what their actions are and who they might be. And then again, to the fairy tale, the Prince of Persia is an actual like vintage or antique Sicilian rod marionette, which is a type of puppetry from Sicily that is actually the puppets are built to be in armor and to have their heads cut off. So it immediately came to mind for the Prince of Persia. And then for Timur, which was actually the hardest puppet to kind of resolve that issue of opera singer with puppet, and also, not a trained puppeteer. So a big part of my job is how to design a puppet that emulates what a performer, actor, singer might already know how to work with, or what skill set they have that they can kind of translate into. So he is wearing like a half body where the Timur puppet will probably sit on his shoulders and it'll have a head, but the actor singer's legs will provide the legs for it, and his hands will control the puppet's hand. They'll either be the puppet hands or have little puppet hands that he works. Um, and so my idea with that is the Timur puppet is kind of the vestige of Timur's kingship that he wears around his neck, weighing him down. The thing that he lost is there. And so he can do the hands kind of intuitively as he sings. That will kind of bring the puppet to life. And the other aspect of all of these character puppets is like Timur's puppet, as this thing that weighs him down, will be kind of made to look like stone. So it's this heavy thing that he carries, and based on Turandot, like the armor she wears, they're going to be grays and maybe some silver or reflective to kind of show this armor. And Liu, with her kind of worn outfit, will be this soft, silken kind of feel with a little bit of glimmer for her soul now that she's dead. So we've worked in kind of a thought of elements. What is the element that this character is made out of? And so you'll see in Ping Pang and Pong, there's a lot of whimsy, like feathers and little like sashes and fabric. So they have this sense of whimsy and the movement that's inherent in what the hat frou frou is made out of. And then the Prince of Persia is a toy, a literal toy that Turandot and the executioner and even the boy reading the book are playing with. Now, for the next slide, the third kind of puppet that I've touched on for Turandot, which is kind of because it is in a symphony hall and there's no like actual set, there's a lot of space. And that I am trying to fill with grand silk work, or a name that Eric said that I will use forever, silkography. And like the Emperor, Eric came to me with this idea of kind of the Wizard of Oz. So he will be the grandest of all silks, where they're actually like up to 30 feet long pieces of silk that are manipulated and kind of flow through the house and soar in these kind of amorphous shapes. And then they'll join to become the emperor. So then he'll be off to the side, kind of there, overlooking the action. And so I have about 5 different types of controls and different types of silk that I use to give different effects for different characters. Like he's very large and flowy, like I think Eric said, a giant ball of taffeta. He's also like roiling clouds. So he's the clouds, the sun coming through the clouds. So that's his very lighty and lofty. But then for some of the other ones, we have more direct, more like celebratory silks that are fun and can kind of move around. And so we have this kind and different scales, because I've got the same kind of silk in small pieces, in giant pieces, and heavy silks, light silks. So we'll be able to create character just through fabric and movement. And so you can do small scale for a small emotional scene, or you can go big. So those are kind of the characters and the thought process I have through the show. And I also have to say it's fun working. I love working with a costume designer to see what they create and what colors. So we're sharing fabrics, we're sharing colorways, we're sharing ideas behind it, and then working with Eric to see where they go together, where they break apart, sometimes literally. So that's the world of puppetry.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin. Moving on to lighting, our third design element, and a message in absentia from Ken Smith, our lighting designer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ken Smith, the lighting designer for Turandot. Sorry to miss this call, but I am flying somewhere around the country at this point. I'll just give you a little overview of what I'm thinking about on my approach to this show. It's a very exaggerated story of fear and power and cruelty, and reminds me of a Grimm's fairy tale. Every character, carries a past that keeps them from facing their deepest fears. And so to match that dark storybook feeling, I want to design the show with very strong and simple visuals, using bold colors, high contrast lights, texture, to really reinforce how precarious the stakes are for this story and for these characters. And the look of the production should match the weight of their emotions, including Puccini's music. There's also a lot of tenderness and grief that works in this piece. So there are some quieter moments that we can pull away kind of from the larger world, the public side of the show, to a much more private and intimate space. Puccini's music definitely leads the way. I've used the score a lot when I'm designing, and it's sort of my main guide in helping shape the atmosphere. Even using the shifts from major to minor keys, the rhythms and tempos, and really the way the music is orchestrated. Each scene kind of helps me through figuring out what kind of light is needed and space is needed. So some of my questions are, where in the kingdom are we? How large or small is this space? What time of day is it? Is it dark or bright, warm or cold? What's at stake for these characters, and who holds the power? Also, what is the emotional feeling and atmosphere of the scene? So all of these kind of play into what we want the audience to see and experience. So we'll explore all of these, of course, using projections, costume, the scenic ideas that we've kind of found working through research. So there's puppetry, shadow play, each of them revealing a different side of a character. So intentionally, we're going to keep the space darker. That means putting black carpet and black flooring on the stage to keep the area a little darker. It allows us to control the light a little better, even though the back of the orchestra will be lit, of course, and in fact, they'll be part of the scene. So the difficulties in this concert hall that a traditional proscenium theater doesn't have is we don't, with the concert hall, the whole hall is basically the stage space. It's very light colored wood, it's white, as like a proscenium theater has kind of a picture frame around it, and it's dark and it's usually black. But this is a whole different side. So we're going to incorporate the architectural elements within the concert hall. So we're just trying to, isolate as best we can and be able to visually orient ourselves into this kingdom of Turandot. We have two different kind of lighting fixtures that are in this theater. One are conventional fixed units where we can't refocus them during the show. But there's also many moving lights in this theater which allow us to create different textures and colors and even change the focus from the lighting console itself. So it gives us a large range of options, but it also means we need to take our time to shape each look carefully. We'll have about 2 days to load in all the lighting and build the lighting for each scene, and then we'll work over the rehearsal period and just make some final adjustments as we can. So hopefully you'll see, feel, and hear all the drama that Puccini envisioned, and hopefully all the things that we envisioned with Eric at the helm. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoy the show.
Eric, you are muted.
And a rookie mistake. There we have a really broad overview of what we've been up to, how we're all approaching this visually and storytelling wise. That will only become more and more refined as we move closer and as we get into rehearsals and things are being built and all of that. And we're so excited to bring this to you in just a few weeks. I know we're getting very close to our time. I just want to open the floor to any questions that you might have about what you've seen today, what you've heard, any questions you have about opera or design or puppetry in general. The floor is yours. Don't be shy.
Not a question, but more of a comment that I noticed. I love the way that the costume interplays with the puppetry, but then the puppetry also interplays with the lighting because of the shadow. So it's like every artistic thread is being connected in this storybook. So that's just an observation that I really enjoyed. So Eric, I believe that's probably your doing to kind of make it. Like
it's really a director's dream to have designers that can and want to do that there is such incredible collaboration to be able to give a presentation like this and have people actually pick up on that before actually seeing it in action. It's great. So Robin, Kate, Ken, thank you so much. Other thoughts, questions?
No.
Something you've always wanted to know about opera, but never had a venue to ask it. This is it. All right. Well, if there are,
I do have a question.
Oh yeah, please.
I do have a question. So, with all your different elements, who makes the final decision as to? Do you make the final decision as to like what the costumes will look like, what the puppetry is going to be, since that's different than just a straight full-on opera? How does that or is it a collaborative?
It is collaborative. As with anything, with so many moving parts, there has to be someone or some people kind of stepping back to see the whole thing. I mean, I have the luxury of not having to figure out how these silks are going to actually function or how the costumes actually get built and what fabric gets used. I have the benefit to step back and say, well, here's the kind of story we're all moving towards telling. And I'm blessed to have these incredible designers who do the hard work and also have those conversations about, well, let's look at the whole picture of this. The other things that I'm balancing are what are the singers doing? What are Carl's needs and the orchestra's needs and the singers' needs to sing this as well as we all want it to be sung? So in the traditional sense, yes, the director is a place where the buck can stop. But I'm a huge fan of collaboration. And so it is, I like to think, hopefully, it is in fact a team effort.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Fiona.
Hi. Yeah, I do have a question. You're less than 10 days away, and I hear people saying we may have screens on the side if we need more. And I'm thinking 10 days from now, and I'm panicking, and I'm only going to watch. So that's my question. Thank you.
I think Eileen from the Symphony is on it. Please don't say the word panic. with anybody from the symphony. No, this is it is it could sound bizarre on the surface of this, the way that that productions in general come together. It's months and months of planning and design work and conversations and logistics that we've been hard at work on for all those many months. And then we start rehearsals the 5th of April, about a week and a half or so from opening night, which is what we've done before with this. And so it is possible. It's a very fast process, but the singers that are hired have all done their roles before, so come already kind of ready to play and ready to tell the story in a new way. But yes, it's a lot of loading everything up and getting everything ready so that when we start on day one, we'll have dozens and dozens of questions to figure out. And then over the next week to 10 days, they all get worked out somehow through the insanity and miracle of live theater. It all does come together. So rest assured, everything's going to be great on opening night.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
I just want to say that we're lifelong lovers of opera, of course, Pacific Symphony, but we're season ticket holders at the LA Opera because we like opera so much. And what you guys are doing here, we love just as much. I don't feel like we're going to a step down when we come to here at Turandot. It's an experience that's every bit as wonderful as what we see in LA on a good night there. So you're to be congratulated from a member of the audience.
Thank you. No, that means a lot. And I will tell you, the cast that we have assembled, that Eileen and Carl have assembled, I would argue, this is my unbiased opinion, rival, if not surpass, some of the casting that LA Opera does. These singers that you're going to hear in this Turandot are without parallel.
Good. I'm pleased.
Karen and Jim, we would love to get that on a quote because
you're welcome to quote me if you recorded it.
All right, it is being recorded. So Eric, I would just want to say thank you to the entire team. Eric, you've done such a great job with this presentation, and thank you everyone for being on the call. I do have a couple of things I want to announce while I have you here. We have the Opera Focus rehearsal on Tuesday, April 14th. We would love to have everyone on this call join. The way you do that right now is to just contact me. I could put my email in the chat, and then we can get you the invite for that with all the information, but it will be at the concert hall, and it's going to be at 7:30. The other thing I would like to invite you all to is the opera dinner on opening night. It's on Thursday, April 16th, and Eric will be there as well with Carl St. Clair, our conductor, and it is $125 to join the dinner. And it includes valet. It's going to be at the Park Club. So please, if you're interested in that, let me know. Same email. We'd love to get you more information and love to see you there. With that, I want to say thank you again to everyone who joined us live, joined us virtually. And if you're seeing this in a recording, I hope you're going to come to the opera.
Of course.
All right, Eric, any last words?
No, I just hope to see everybody there. And if you see me or Robin or Kate or Ken milling around the auditorium, come say hi. It's we do this for the audience, but oftentimes we open the show and then we leave. So there's not a lot of opportunity to actually hear how this impacts the people watching it. So all this is done for the audience. So thank you, and thank you to Kate and Robin and Ken for lending your insight today, and Daniel for setting this whole thing up. It was really wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.